Suicide Squad has just recently released and it is a massive failure both commercially and critically. It failed so hard that pretty much every big review site gave it a 5 or a 6 out of 10, leaving it with an average of 59 on Metacritic. And I mean, I can't say that I'm too surprised because the writing was on the wall with this one. A live service third-person looter shooter based on an IP that not many people really care about. This was just a tone-deaf game that nobody asked for in a genre that's already oversaturated to the brim. It's depressing, really. On its first launch week, it had a staggering all-time peak of 13,000 players, which on paper sounds pretty high. But when you compare it to the Marvel's Avengers game, you'll see that it only reaches a little over half of what that game ever achieved. And considering that even Square Enix lost money with the Avengers game despite more sales, it's highly probable that Suicide Squad will be a huge financial disaster for Rocksteady and WB. This is the very definition of a game that the studio did not want to make. I am quite certain that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was made only because the publisher wanted a piece of that lucrative live service pie. But unfortunately, due to creative differences, Suicide Squad would end up being a disappointing mess of shallow mechanics, bland content, and terrible writing. And the worst part about this game is that it's selling for a full $70 to what amounts to, at best, a mediocre experience. It's no wonder fans of the Arkham games were so disappointed with how Suicide Squad turned out. I would be too if this was what Rocksteady was cooking up for the past 9 years since their last game. And after all that time in the kitchen, we get this poorly cobbled together live service slop of a game. I know that many people aren't going to buy Suicide Squad themselves, so I bit the bullet for everyone else and played the game thoroughly so you don't have to. And trust me, I really tried to like this game, but I just couldn't. There were so many problems and issues with Suicide Squad that made me like the game less and less as I played more of it. So ladies and gentlemen, this is everything wrong with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Let's start off with the gameplay. Now, to be fair, there are some moments of fun from time to time. Even though no one wanted this to be a third-person looter shooter, it does at least do the shooter part decently well because the gameplay does have bits of genuine fun littered throughout it. And each of the characters have their own unique combat style that complements their archetype. Like King Shark is for the more tanky close-range playstyle, while Deadshot is for the more long-range playstyle. The movement in this game is extremely fluid, and it makes traveling around the rooftops of Metropolis such an exhilarating feeling, especially when you take the time to learn each character's unique quirks and incorporate them into your gameplay. For me, I played the game as an extremely mobile Captain Boomerang who quickly teleports behind enemy lines and wipes out the bad guys just as fast as he gets there. If it's one thing that this game gets right, it's the moment-to-moment gameplay loop. Zipping around from rooftop to rooftop, blowing up bad guys with really colorful explosions was admittedly pretty fun for the first few hours of the game. And each of the characters have their own unique gameplay elements that make them really fun and refreshing to play. But unfortunately, it was only fun for the first few hours because Suicide Squad never really expands on its gameplay that much throughout the game. What you do in hour 1 is exactly the same as what you'll be doing in hour 30, 40, or 50, except with bigger numbers. And that stems from one of the biggest problems that this game has, the repetitiveness. Throughout the entire game, you'll be doing the same things over and over and over again with no change whatsoever. The missions that you do throughout the story are the exact same as the ones you'll be doing out in the open world, but with a cutscene attached to it. And I know what you're thinking, well, don't all games do this? Technically yes, but the good ones actually make an effort to make the experience feel fresh the whole way through, either by changing the scenery or changing the enemies. Like in Borderlands, where you're shooting the same guns and using the same skills for most of the game, but its story constantly takes you to brand new locations where you'll fight a whole host of completely new enemies, making it feel fresh the whole way through. Now compare that to Suicide Squad, where throughout the entire 10-hour campaign, you fight the same 5 enemies in the exact same map. You're taken to an actual brand new location one time during the story, and it's recycled as the endgame map, so the novelty quickly wears off. I was already beginning to feel boredom in hour 3 of my playthrough, hoping that this game would eventually switch it up, but nope, it never did after 30 hours of playing. And they expect us to infinitely play the same 3 missions over and over again? No thanks. Now let's talk about what specifically made this game feel so repetitive. Number 1, the mission variety. For a game that's in a genre known for its infinite replayability, Suicide Squad unfortunately doesn't really have very much of it because most of the missions can be basically boiled down to a few categories: defend the points, kill the enemies, or gather the materials. There are some exceptions here and there with the support missions, which are the side quests that unlock very useful gameplay features. And these all have special rules like enemies can only be damaged with counter shots, or enemies can only take damage from crits, something like that. I see that the devs were trying to mix it up here, but unfortunately these missions ended up being the most annoying ones to do because you can't damage the enemies normally, so you're forced to complete them the only way the devs allow you to, resulting in the gameplay slowing down to a snail's pace. But the irony here is that the story and support missions are the most variety you're ever going to get with this game, because after you're done with those one-time operations, you're stuck doing the same 5 missions in the exact same locations, which leads me to the endgame progression. After you've completed the main campaign, you're introduced to the endgame seasonal progression called Finite Crisis. This is where you unlock the sort of raid type missions called incursions that you and your whole party have to pay for with a special currency in order to even enter. Once you begin, you'll be taken to the endgame area where you have to complete one objective within the time limit and get out alive. And depending on the mastery level, they can come with a number of difficulty modifiers, which sound interesting on paper, but in reality they're either really unfun or don't really feel like they make much of an impact. Like the boom modifier, which is the most poorly implemented one out of all of them, because whenever you kill an enemy, they instantly explode without any visual indication whatsoever. You just all of a sudden take damage from enemies you kill, and considering how most characters have a close range playstyle, that means you'll almost always be punished for killing enemies. But I digress. On paper, the multiverse idea sounds amazing for an infinitely replayable gameplay loop, but Rocksteady have messed that up by not making these incursions have a pool of randomly generated objectives with varying spawn points. Every incursion will always have the same objective in the same spot. The only thing that might change are the modifiers of the map, but they don't really change the gameplay that much, if at all. And then once you reach level 30 on your Finite Crisis level, you unlock the ability to do a final mission once again and face Brainiac at a higher difficulty, and that's pretty much all the content this game has to offer. There is no brand new endgame area, dungeons, or raids that you can do. You can't even refight the Justice League bosses at a higher difficulty for some reason, which is really baffling. Did Rocksteady forget that they have 5 bosses other than Brainiac they could use? And I'm not saying they were good fights because they weren't, but at least try to give some variety. Like, what the hell? There's only one boss that we could fight in the endgame. How is that acceptable for any live service RPG? It's just a jarring decision that felt like it was made because the devs either ran out of time or completely overlooked this. The second reason why this game feels so repetitive is because of the lack of enemy variety. There are basically 7 unique enemy types in the entire game, with only 3 of them having a single variant version, which is not a lot for a game meant to be played infinitely. For reference, Batman Arkham Knight has 5 enemy types, with 3 of them having at least 4 different variations, and that's a single player game meant to be put down after you beat it. Also, these variations massively change the way you approach the enemies in Arkham Knight, making each of the enemy encounters sort of feel like a puzzle. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Suicide Squad because the solution to beating all of the enemy types is just to shoot them or the weak spot until they die. Which, there's nothing wrong with going the brain dead shooting target route, but at least make them have some sort of visual variation to keep it feeling fresh. So let's go over each of the enemy types in the game, shall we? First, we have the Scavengers, which are the standard fodder enemies whose sole purpose is to just run at you. They're really easy to kill, and sometimes they might have armor, which you have to break before you can damage them with a gun. Next are the Troopers, who are the generic grunts that shoot at you. There's nothing really special about them, except sometimes they can be infused with Flash's essence, which gives them Speed Force powers, and that sounds cool in concept, but in reality, you just deal with them the same way you deal with armored enemies. Then you have the Snipers, which are one of the most annoying enemies to fight because they teleport away when you get too close to them, meaning that they're a nightmare to deal with for people who play close range builds. The only feasible way to kill them is to either outsnipe them or countershot them. They should have made it so that when you get close to them and they start to teleport, you'll have a small window to kill them before the teleport animation completes. This way it opens up a lot more methods of dealing with snipers and it rewards skillful players. These guys have one variant, which is the Batman infusion, which just makes them invisible and immune to counter shots. Again, you'll still deal with them the same way you do with the normal ones. The next enemy type are the mortar guys, which are pretty easy to deal with, just break their armor and kill them. And the hardest enemy type to kill are the brutes because they are extremely bullet spongy. They are easily the worst designed enemies in the game because they have an obscene amount of health with multiple health bars that don't accurately show how much health they actually have. And on top of that, they explode whenever they die with an explosion that's completely invisible. Why not just make them have one health bar? And why make them explode on death? Now combine these guys with the Boom Mutator and they'll easily become the most annoying enemies in the game. They just completely felt like a slog to fight, and the fact that the final mission spams these guys is really obnoxious. And the last two enemies are the vehicles, where you just have to shoot their weak points. They're pretty easy to deal with as well. And sometimes the helicopter will come with a Green Lantern infusion, which just gives them a small shield that you have to shoot before you can hit the weak point. And that's it for all the enemy types in the game. The lack of variety is one thing, but the more disappointing aspect about it is that the way you deal with all of them is pretty much the same. You just shoot them or melee them before you shoot them. It's not very engaging in the gameplay department. It makes for very bland play sessions over long periods of time. So now let's talk about the loot system. The whole reason why the execs over at WB wanted this game to be a looter shooter so bad, so it must be really good, right? Well, not really. You see, to no one's surprise, Suicide Squad did not need to be a looter shooter because the looter aspect of it is pretty bare bones. How it works is that whenever you finish a mission, you'll get one loot box every single time. That loot box will then give you a bunch of gear with rarities ranging from white to pink and red. Pinks are the super legendary items, and reds are the seasonal chase items that give you set bonuses. And sometimes if you're lucky, your pink weapon might have a synergy with your red weapon, creating another sort of set bonus with the villain manufacturers, which is cool and all, but for some reason the game never tells you about them or shows you what villains have synergy with each other. But I digress. The main problem is that the rarity system is pretty much useless because you'll only be using legendaries and up for 95% of the game, making all the rarities below it completely invisible. And yes, I know that in every looter shooter you'll always end up with the highest tier gear possible, it's just a part of the genre. But in those looter shooters, the lower rarities also serve a purpose. They're the gear that you get during the early game of your playthrough, and as you progress through the levels, you'll steadily climb up the rarity ladder, getting greens, then blues, then purples, until you ultimately reach legendary or higher, where you get some of the best gear possible. And that's how progression has always been in every looter shooter. Sure, you could sometimes get lucky and get a legendary during the early levels, but those are rare occurrences and are not to be expected. The climb up the rarity ladder is supposed to be slow and methodical, but in the end it would be rewarding because you felt like you've earned the right to start wielding these legendary weapons through your own hard work. And even though you're at the level to start using these items, getting one to drop is still an uncommon occurrence, meaning that having a legendary loot drop still felt exciting even at the end game. But Suicide Squad, on the other hand, just said screw all that and gives you legendary tier items near the very start of the game, removing any sense of enjoyment from getting them. What's the point of having a white to red rarity system when you'll pretty much never see anything purple and below for the most of the game? Suicide Squad might as well only have 3 rarities, yellow, pink, and red, because that's all you'll be seeing for the majority of the game. This rarity loot system fits in so poorly with this game, and it's obvious that it has no place being here. I'm just surprised they didn't have the option to buy these loot boxes in the in-game cash shop. As for the guns themselves, they're honestly kind of bland because the thing about them, which is kind of a nitpick from me, is that there aren't very many tools in this game that allow people to really min-max their builds. For example, there are no advanced tooltips that you can toggle to be able to see the minimum and maximum rolls of each of the stats in your gear. So chasing those god roll pieces of equipment is not really a thing in this game. And I mean, there is a chance an item can drop as a master version, which is just the same item but stronger. But that's not exactly the same thing because you still have to hope you get good rolls on the gear. What also baffles me is that you can't even see the item level or gear score of your equipment. Why not? That is literally one of the main metrics players use to gauge how much they're progressing in power. That's why the loot in this game felt bland during my entire 30 hours of playtime. It was because the new piece of gear I got felt the same as the previous one, even though the newer one I got is statistically better. And one of the biggest disappointments about the gear system is the lack of build crafting options. The most you can do is change the explicit rolls that a piece of gear comes with, and change the element type of your melee weapon and grenade. That's it. There are no prefixes or suffixes that can greatly change how a piece of gear works like in Borderlands, nor is there a deep crafting or modding system that you can do with your equipment to create the perfect piece of loot tailor-made to your build like in Destiny 2. Every piece of gear you use is pretty much always going to be the same as every other player's, which is a huge missed opportunity to allow the players to personalize their builds to their specific liking. I mean, why can't we even apply elemental afflictions to our guns? That would have been so cool. To further illustrate my point, there are the obscene amount of crafting materials in the game that don't really have a reason to exist. Yes, I know that they're used to craft and modify your gear, but does the game really need 6 different currencies in order to do that? I feel like just having 1 or 2 can still serve the same purpose, but having 6 of them that are all used for the same things just creates more unnecessary bloat. Maybe these currencies are a remnant of a much larger and robust crafting system that'll scrap sometime during development. Who knows? But as of now, most of them effectively have no reason to exist. Now let's talk about the leveling progression of the game. Whenever you level up, you get a skill point that you can put into the skill tree, and you can do this up until the max level of 30, where you'll then level up your mastery rank, which is akin to the guardian ranks in Borderlands or paragon levels in Diablo. You'll also unlock a sort of paragon board where you can infinitely put your skill points in whenever you level up your mastery rank. This system seems cool enough on the surface, but one of the main issues with the skill tree is how linear it is. You'll see in the user interface what looks to be 3 separate skill trees, each focusing on very different styles of gameplay. And with how they're separated into 3 distinct paths in the UI, you would naturally think that each character has 3 different archetypes that they can spec into on the skill tree. And if you put all your points into one tree, that'll drastically change how you play the game, except that's not how it works, like, at all. Because the thing is, you don't actually get to choose which skill tree you want to put your skill points into. Yeah, you see, how it works is that whenever you level up, you get 1 skill point for one of the trees, then the next level you'll get the skill point for the next tree, and the next level is the next tree. Then, once you've alternated through each of them, you'll move down to the next row where you'll start the cycle all over again. The UI is literally giving you the illusion of freedom of choice, when in reality, it's just one linear progression where you only have 2 or 3 choices to make each level. Whose idea was it to make this into 3 separate paths instead of one linear tree, because that's basically what it is. Another problem with the skill tree is that the skills themselves are just very bland and don't really feel like they make much of an impact on the overall gaming experience. Everything on the skill trees basically just gives you a numerical stat increase, like increased shotgun damage by 10% or enemy kills generate 5% shield. Nothing here fundamentally changes how you play the game, all they do is just increase the numbers on your screen. And I understand that this kind of filler is necessary for an RPG, but there also needs to be something that tangibly elevates how you play the game. For example, in Borderlands 2, the character Axton has the ability to place a sentry turret, and 3 of his capstone skill tree perks all add new properties to his turrets that fundamentally change how they're used. Like this one where the turrets will apply an incredibly useful debuff to its targets, giving Axton the freedom to focus on DPS instead of having to reapply it. Or this one where the turret will create a massive explosion around it whenever it's deployed. Or this one where you can just straight up have 2 turrets deployed at the same time. And this is just for one character. All the other ones also have capstone perks that add new properties to their abilities, making each of them incredibly fun and fresh to play. Now compare that to Suicide Squad, where the capstone perks just increase your damage or increase your combo meter so you can do more damage. How riveting. Instead of just increasing damage, how about they add some new properties to your skills and abilities? Like for Captain Boomerang, one of his perks could add an explosion at the end of his boomerang teleport. Or maybe they could have one where it lets his melee attack hit multiple targets, or even double the range of it. Like, there is so much more that you could do here, it's frustrating. This whole skill tree system is just one huge missed opportunity to really make something unique, and it's disappointing. Oh, and also for the Paragon/Mastery board thingy, it's practically useless. You spend your whole skill point to increase your damage by 0.1% or shields by 0.5%. You would need to dump hundreds of skill points into this for it to actually affect gameplay. And the rest of the perks are too conditional to really be practical in any sense, so like 80% of the board just isn't worth taking over straight damage. Now we get to the live service model, the whole reason for this game's tortured existence. And to no one's surprise, the live service experience of this game is absolutely horrendous. First of all, the online multiplayer barely even functions because the servers struggle to hold anything together. I don't know what back alley, off-brand, dollar store place Rocksteady purchased their server infrastructure from, but they need to get a refund now because this shit is terrible. Constant disconnects, major rubber banding, delayed responses, and a boatload of bugs because this game is buggy as hell. I encountered so many of them during my playthrough, and these weren't just small visual glitches, these were ones that affected gameplay, and some were pretty much game breaking. I had a really annoying one that deletes my bullets in my gun after I had just reloaded it. I had one where the audio would bug out and start going haywire during gameplay. Hell, I had a bug where the final boss of the game would not spawn in and I had to restart the whole mission all over again. And this happened twice. The amount of bugs, glitches, and server instability in this AAA game is just downright embarrassing. 9 years this game was in development and the servers can barely even hold together a co-op lobby. Trying to do 4-player co-op is like trying to build a vehicle made out of toothpicks and bubblegum, then trying to use it to race in a NASCAR competition. Sometimes it works and everything runs fine, but most of the time it's just a pain in the ass. So now let's talk about the monetization side of the live service model. Of course, this full-price $70 AAA title needed to have microtransactions in it because why not? And like in many other live service games, there's a premium currency that you can purchase from the in-game cash shop that you can use to buy cosmetic skins. Like every live service game, the currency packages give you an arbitrary amount of tokens that can easily lead to predatory pricing if the developers choose to do so. To which WB have revealed that they are doing so because they are charging about $10 worth of tokens for color palette swaps, which is the same price as an actual skin. But that's not all. Just as of the recent patch, they've added more expensive skin recolors to the in-game store. What they used to sell for about $10, they are now selling for about $15 worth of tokens. And again, these are color palette swaps, not actual skins. WB have already revealed their intentions this early into the game's life cycle, and this is only the beginning of it because there are still going to be battle passes, DLC characters, seasonal passes, you name it, all coming in the near future. I wouldn't be surprised if they become more and more brazen with the egregious pricing because we all know this was the reason why Suicide Squad had to be a live service game. Moving on, I want to talk about the visuals of Suicide Squad because for the most part, the game actually looks pretty good. The textures and character models are extremely detailed, the war-torn metropolis is actually visually nice to look at, and the overall graphical fidelity is what you'd expect from a AAA game. I'm sure some of you have seen the graphical comparisons between Batman Arkham Knight and this game floating around the internet. And in my opinion, the comparisons are a bit disingenuous because Suicide Squad looks nowhere near as bad looking as what the comparisons are making it out to be. In fact, I would say that the technical visual fidelity of Suicide Squad is way better than Arkham Knight's, as it should be. But for some reason, Arkham Knight just looks better overall, despite running on older technology. And I think it's because of the massive differences in art direction between the two. Arkham Knight's setting is more dark and gritty and focuses more on creating that perfect atmosphere that matches the edgy vibe of the game. That's why it's always nighttime and why it's almost always raining, because that's what the target audience of young male edgelords prefer, aka me. Now compare that to Suicide Squad's art style that's targeted more towards older gamers who've grown out of that edgy phase and perhaps want a more lighthearted experience. That's why there's a whole dynamic day-night cycle and weather system because the artist went for a more atmospheric variety rather than a singular one, and in turn the quality looks lower. And I'm not saying Suicide Squad looks worse than Arkham Knight, I'm just saying that I prefer Arkham Knight's art style over Suicide Squad's, for no particular reason. While we're at the topic of visuals, there is one problem that Suicide Squad has with it, and it's the overloaded amounts of special effects on the screen. There's always constantly bright and colorful effects exploding, flashing, or blinking on the screen that it legitimately becomes difficult to even see what's going on. Now imagine dumping everything all together on the screen at the same time and you're looking at a mess of visual vomit anytime you're in combat. I get that this was the intention because the combat is supposed to be fast and frenetic, but a lot of the time I just can't see what's going on my screen. I think they should have turned down the visual effects by at least 50% because the Christmas lights visual effects are more off-putting than it is enjoyable to look at. Now I want to get to one of the biggest weak points of the game, the boss fights. The boss fights in Suicide Squad are so horrendously bad, it's embarrassing. None of these bosses were fun nor interesting to fight, and they just ended in the most anticlimactic way possible. We are killing the Justice League for Pete's sake here. At least try to make them these epic multi-stage battles that are super cinematic. Instead, we get these boring and flaccid fights that end in a disappointing whimper. Let's go down the list of all the battles, shall we? The first hero we fight is the Flash. This is probably the worst fight in the game because he legitimately doesn't do a whole lot. And yeah, I know it's the very first boss battle, so it's supposed to be simple. But this is just a whole lot of nothing. For this battle, you just have to hit a counter shot on the Flash to charge your anti-Flash device so you can deal damage to him. That's it. The problem with this fight is that the Flash only does two things. Yes, you heard that right. Two. He shoots a little energy blast at you and spawns a tornado. That's it. All he does the whole entire fight is just run to a spot, stand still, shoot his tiny energy blast, then run to a different spot to do it again. And then once he gets to half health, he'll occasionally spawn in a tornado that's easily avoidable. He effectively just has one attack and stands still so you can unload bullets into him, even though he could easily kill us all in a split second. But we gotta suspend our disbelief with these boss fights because the Suicide Squad keeps obtaining these MacGuffins that completely protects them from getting absolutely demolished. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that after all of the hype and build up to the Flash fight, he just kind of flops over dead unceremoniously like a sack of potatoes. In fact, all of the heroes do when you kill them, which is also just really depressing since this is the Justice League we're killing here and they all just die in the most pathetic way possible. The next boss fight that we encounter is Green Lantern, whose fight is slightly better than the Flash's, but that's not really a high bar to reach in the first place. For this fight, you basically just have to shoot the constructs around the arena until Green Lantern's shield is depleted, where you can then deal damage to him. It's honestly a pretty forgettable fight because Green Lantern really doesn't do much himself. He just kind of sits there waiting for you to destroy his constructs. But despite that, the fight sort of got intense when he started to spam turrets and helicopters around the arena. So out of all the boss fights, this one was like the second best, which isn't really saying much considering how terrible the rest of them are. The next battle is with the Batman, or Nightmare Batman, because we don't actually get to fight him as a human for some reason. And after we defeat him in his nightmare form, we never fight him in his normal form, which is a huge missed opportunity to make a really unique fight. But as for the battle itself, Batman is just one big target that you dump bullets into the entire fight while dodging one of his 3 attacks that are easily avoidable. That's it. That's the whole fight. It's much less difficult than the Flash's fight and a lot more boring to play. At least his design looks cool, I guess. The next hero we defeat is Superman, which had the most potential to be an epic boss battle, but nope. All he does is throw cars, shoot lasers, and does a little ice breath while constantly yapping the entire time. This is the Superman we're talking about here. Couldn't they have made the fight a little more, cinematic? Like, come on, he just sits there and lets us shoot him with kryptonite-laced bullets when he could easily kill the Suicide Squad. And not only that, but after we kill him, he just kind of plops dead like he had a stroke or something. We killed a Man of Steel with steel. And finally, the last battle is with the main villain of this game, Brainiac. Surely Rocksteady had something spectacular planned for their final boss fight, right? Nope, they actually just literally recycled the Flash fight, but this time there are ad phases. That's it. The whole final boss is exactly just the first boss that was already trash to begin with. This has got to be one of the laziest final bosses I've ever experienced in a AAA video game. This is on the same level as Starfield's final boss. That's how bad it is. And the funny thing is, Brainiac transforming into the Justice League members isn't such a bad idea for a final boss battle. It's just that he only transforms into the Flash for some reason. Why couldn't Brainiac transform into the other Justice League members and use their powers? There's no actual lore reason as to why he can't, so what the hell? This can't be explained other than Rocksteady either running out of time or them being extremely lazy, both of which are not good looks for this game that was supposedly in development for 9 years. Now that I've talked about everything else, let's move on to the main course of this video, the story, because oh boy does the writing have so many problems with it. But to be fair, it's not all bad. There are some good parts to it, like how the voice acting and facial animations are top notch as expected of a AAA video game. The first half of the story felt like it was relatively decently written, and the chemistry between the Suicide Squad members was really entertaining to watch. I mean, how can you not like how wholesome King Shark is in this game?
Speaking of, doing, mate?
I'm smiling.
But that's only for the main members of the squad. The other villains that join us are sadly just relegated to glorified vendors, which is a huge missed opportunity to create a more robust story with them. Anyways, I'm not going to go explain every chapter and every cutscene line by line. I'm just going to skip to the parts that are problematic. So basically what happens so far in the story is that the Suicide Squad get released from prison and get forced to work for Amanda Waller as Task Force X, with the goal of saving the world from the Brainiac invasion. After exiting the Hall of Justice, we learn that the Justice League have been mind-controlled by Brainiac, and it's never really fully explained how the greatest heroes on Earth got beaten by Brainiac. They would have to be a bunch of fools to somehow get mind-control with the powers they have. The only context we're ever given is through a codex entry, and the audio just makes them seem plain incompetent.
This Brainiac wants to open negotiations aboard his ship. It's a trap.
Agreed. That much is apparent.
I hear you both, but we have to go in good faith. What if I had come to Earth and...
Cal, buddy, I mean, let's be real. You didn't show up in a giant skull.
I didn't choose how I got here, Flash. Now, I'll admit it's not the most inviting presence, but if we can avoid fighting altogether, we owe it to the people of Metropolis to try. They know the strength of the League, everyone does. Now let's show them our heart, our compassion.
Our recklessness. We can't just leave Metropolis undefended.
We'll be in the thick of it, Bruce. Talks get nasty, we toss that thing right back into space.
We're in this together, gang. The five of us united, there's nothing we can't do. Let's show them our intentions.
You know what they say about good intentions, Clark.
Why would all the Justice League members go to Brainiac's home turf to negotiate with him where he could easily take advantage of them? If anything, at least Batman would have stayed behind because he clearly knew that it was a trap. So him going to meet Brainiac with the rest of the members just makes Batman look completely stupid, even though he's supposed to be the smartest one amongst them. But I digress. Shortly after we're sent out to the field, Green Lantern captures us and gives us a tour of the war-torn Metropolis. Then the non-mind controlled Flash saves us from Lantern and takes him on all by himself. This would be the first time in the story that Flash saves us. Flash and Green Lantern duke it out for a bit, and the Flash gets his ass handed to him without even so much as scratching Lantern because he's just that weak, I guess. So we find him on the ground dying and take him to this abandoned museum where we encounter evil Batman who kills people now. And admittedly, the section afterwards where we have to walk through a dark building with the looming fear of Batman hiding in the shadows was actually pretty cool. And obviously Batman picks us off one by one, but he didn't kill anyone for some reason until we get to Harley Quinn where he tries to shoot her, but then Flash comes out of nowhere and saves her, and then he gets his teeth knocked in by Batman as a result. This would be the second time Flash would save the Suicide Squad, which is important for later. We then get back to the Hall of Justice where we then encounter Wonder Woman who's just hiding there for some reason. She then proceeds to kick our asses, and that's when Amanda Waller comes out and asks Wonder Woman to work with them, to which she dumbfoundedly declines, then goes off on her own to solo the entire Justice League. Why didn't Wonder Woman agree to work with Waller here? I get that she doesn't trust them, but I'm pretty sure she would know that her best chance of saving the world is by working together with Amanda Waller and Task Force X, because these are dire times and she would want all the help that she could get. So Wonder Woman not taking the offer just makes her seem hard-headed and short-sighted, two qualities I don't think the writers intended to give Wonder Woman. After a bit, we then encounter the Green Lantern again, who traps us in an arena with some of his enemies. We quickly dispatch the monsters, then we go and secure Poison Ivy, who's been reborn thanks to Lex Luthor, but she's a child now. I guess the writers wanted their own version of Groot or something. And correct me if I'm wrong, as I don't really follow comic book lore, but hasn't Poison Ivy always been born as an adult? Like, she's always just spawned in as a fully grown adult. I don't know, I could be wrong here, maybe there's some lore reason why she's like this. Anyways, we then encounter Lex Luthor himself, who is on a mission to save Metropolis all by his lonesome. And as he was about to fly off, the Flash just rips him out of his suit in a split second. This is where we're introduced to Evil Flash, whose introduction was actually done pretty well here, as he kinda toys with the Suicide Squad as he summons a giant artillery cannon. After we destroy the artillery gun, we go rescue Lex, who reveals he has an anti-Speed Force device and sends Flash flying. Flash, in retaliation, instantly rips out Lex's heart and crushes the device. My question is, if this is how easily the Flash could kill all of us, then why didn't he do it? It seems like huge plot armor to just say that the Flash was playing with his food when he could have easily killed the Suicide Squad right then and there. Anyways, Wonder Woman then comes out of nowhere and captures the Flash in her lasso of truth and asks him how to save everybody, to which he replies that the Justice League has to die. He then breaks free from the lasso and runs off. Then Wonder Woman loses her temper against us for absolutely no reason, even though we just took out the huge artillery cannon all by ourselves. I mean, the least she could do is thank us for, defending the city. But no, this entire game, Wonder Woman is an unlikable character who's an asshole to us for absolutely no reason at all. Sure, the Suicide Squad are a bunch of criminals, but doesn't she know the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend? I know that Wonder Woman distrusts the Suicide Squad, and that's completely reasonable, but they've shown themselves to be somewhat capable of fending off Brainiac's forces, and she still doesn't recognize that? I don't know if her stubbornness is supposed to be her big character flaw or something, but for her not to even be open to the possibility of receiving help just makes her look foolish and incompetent as a superhero. Anyways, after we make it back to the HQ, the Toy Man, one of the smartest engineers in the world, coincidentally just shows up at our front door ready to lend us aid for absolutely zero cost. And he just happens to sport a fully functional anti-Speed Force device on him. How convenient. But seriously though, this actually felt like a Deus Ex Machina moment because the writers didn't feel like writing a believable scenario where we actually go through the trouble of finding someone who could actually make us anti-Speed Force gear. Instead, he just shows up at our front door fully willing to do everything he's told like the good little boy he is. But I digress. After we fully equip ourselves with anti-Speed Force devices, we go take on the Flash. And he mentions at the beginning of the fight that he can't touch us due to the anti-Speed Force technology. Which, okay, sure, that makes sense as to why he never touches us, but it still doesn't excuse the fact that he only has 2 moves for the entire fight. And after we get his health to 0, we shoot him one last time, then he just flops over dead. No epic death scene, no final words, nothing. He just dies unceremoniously as if he had a stroke or something. Then we walk up to his corpse and Captain Boomerang attempts to piss on his body after the Flash saved our lives twice in the story, and he just gets disrespected like this? I know this scene was supposed to be a gag and all, but I feel like the joke just didn't really land because the Flash was treated like a punching bag the whole game and he almost literally got the shit beat out of him to protect us, so we return the thanks by pissing on his corpse? I don't know what it is, but it felt like the writers had this massive hate boner for the Flash. Actually, scratch that, all the male Justice League members, which I'll get into later. But the obvious difference in treatment between the male Justice League members and the female ones, aka Wonder Woman, is really weird and just comes off as cringe and disrespectful to the fans of those heroes. After we had just killed the Flash, we jump into an interdimensional portal that takes us to Earth 2, which is already destroyed by Brainiac, and we get to meet that version of Lex Luthor. We then have to do an escort mission where we guide his truck to a safe spot so he can open the portal back to our universe. I know many people usually dislike escort missions in games, but this one wasn't too bad because we really didn't have to protect Luthor as much as we had to kill the enemies. So the blow was a bit soft in here, which is good on Rocksteady for having that foresight. A little later, we then head to Batman's secret vault under the Wayne Bank and open the super secret lair, only to find Wonder Woman already there, hammering kryptonite into her shield. The thing I'm wondering about this scene is, how did Wonder Woman get into the secret lair? We had to use Lex's device to even open the door, and it was already closed to begin with, so how did she get in? Did she just phase right through the door, or did Batman just give all the Justice League members their very own keys to a secret lab? Anyways, King Shark then makes a comment that the kryptonite should be put onto a sword and not a shield.
It should be in a sword, not a shield. You saw the massacre upstairs.
And he's completely right. What good would kryptonite do on a shield? A sword would be much more effective at subduing Superman. And I get that she doesn't want to kill her friend and everything, but how is kryptonite going to be useful on a shield? And this point would be further proven later on in the game, but we'll get to that soon enough. She then walks off with her newly enhanced shield, and King Shark hits her with the biggest dose of reality that her friends are beyond saving, and that she needs to do what's right for the greater good of the world. But then she just blows him off because he's a shark.
I do not need a lecture on morality from a shark.
Man, the writers were really trying to make Wonder Woman unlikable in this game. We then talked to Lex's hologram, who conveniently knew that Batman had 4 Yellow Lantern cores just sitting there that'll help us take down Green Lantern in this exact location, even though he's never been in this universe before. I'm not saying that this part is bad writing, but it is kinda lame that the exact things that we need to take down the Justice League somehow always just fall into our laps without much effort. With our newfound Yellow Lantern cores, we then go confront the Green Lantern with his metaphorical kryptonite and fight him there. Now I did say before that this fight was marginally better than the Flash's because there were more hazards in the arena and Green Lantern had more than just 2 moves. Once we shoot him a bit and defeat him, he just kinda lays down and dies like some sort of sick dog. It's really lame to see an antagonist built up from the beginning to just lay down and die like that. And of course, his death has to be also disrespected just like everyone else's, as they just show him lying there in his underwear. King Shark for some reason also rips the ring off his finger, then proceeds to put it on, giving him full Green Lantern powers. Then he invokes the Green Lantern Oath and throws a huge shark construct at Brainiac's ship, destroying the shield. Now, I'm not a Green Lantern fan, nor do I know much about their lore, but doesn't the Green Lantern ring have to choose its owner? Like, a random person can't just put on the ring and suddenly they get all of its powers, right? So how is King Shark able to put on the ring and fully utilize its powers? Did the writers just forget this one important detail about one of the most iconic characters ever? Whatever, it doesn't really matter either way because that gag resulted in nothing happening anyways, and this whole scene was really just to introduce evil Superman to us, who then proceeds to fight Wonder Woman to the death. And we see here just how useful that kryptonite on her shield was because it seems like it effectively did nothing to Superman, so that was a waste of time I guess. We then escort Waller back to the Hall of Justice where Wonder Woman and Superman's clash also happens to land. After trading blows for a bit, Superman then smashes Wonder Woman's kryptonite shield, sending her flying to a wall, to which he then picks her up by the neck, giving her the opening to stab him with the kryptonite shard. Superman in retaliation lasers her to death, then retreats back to base, even though he has a huge kryptonite shard lodged in his chest. This should have 100% killed him, and everyone acknowledges that in the game, but it was never really touched upon again in the story. My guess is that Rocksteady planned to reveal that to us in the later seasons of the game's life cycle, which is absolutely stupid because they're cutting out one of the biggest reveals in the story so that they can piecemeal it to us at a later date, where most people would have probably stopped playing. It was a completely idiotic decision to not include this into the base game because it would have most likely lessened the backlash that they would have received for the story's writing. Anyways, we get an emotional Wonder Woman death scene with sad music and everything. And I have to ask, why did Wonder Woman get such an emotional death scene whereas all the other heroes didn't? First of all, she didn't really do that much for the entire story. All I can really think of is that she reveals to the player that we have to kill the Justice League. But I mean, we already knew that. Oh, and she also fights Superman, then dies. So all she did was 2 minor things in the story that didn't really progress the plot whatsoever. Second of all, she was just written to be a completely unlikable, stubborn asshole who refuses any help to save the freaking world. It was a complete dick to us for no reason the entire game. So why are the writers giving her, of all people, an honorable death? The writer's favoritism here is so obvious that it's actually just cringe to have to experience. What should have happened is that Wonder Woman reluctantly works with us in saving Metropolis, and whenever we inevitably fight Superman, she would join us in order to keep him occupied while we provide support with the kryptonite bullets. This way the writers get to make their strong, badass female hero that they wanted so much, while also making a more believable scenario on how the Suicide Squad takes on Superman and wins. Anyways, after that eye-rolling death scene, we get tasked with finding the Batman, who for some reason hasn't stopped us yet, even though we've killed 2 of his comrades already, and he was actively stalking us throughout the game. You'd think he'd do something about it by now, but I guess we just add that to the list of things that the writers forgot about. And obviously, in order to even get access to the Batcave, we would need Batman's personal signature. So how do we get that? Well, Gizmo just happened to find one of Batman's Batmobiles and repurposed it to be able to locate the Batcave. Yep. Another plot convenience. We then find the Batcave and enter it. This is where we then encounter Batman's hologram meant for Robin in case the Justice League ever went rogue. Now, where's Nightwing, Oracle, and Red Hood in all this? Who knows, because the game never really expands on that or ever mentions them again, even though this universe is supposed to be set in the Arkham universe. After messing around with Batman's hologram for a bit, he then shuts off all the lights, and thus we begin one of the worst sequences in the entire game. This is basically the Batman section we experienced at the beginning of the game, but this time it way overstays its welcome because this time you have to slowly walk around the dark and activate the 3 devices for each character. It would have been fine if you only had to do it once, but 4 times? No thanks. Then afterwards, we overcome his fear toxin and thus the Batman boss battle ensues. And while I do like his Nightmare Batman form, this fight was just really lame because he only had 3 moves that were all easily avoidable. And this is the Arkham Batman we're talking about here. Why does he even need to use Fear Toxin in order to take on the Suicide Squad? He could easily take them all on by himself. Hell, he took on all those supervillains in the past Arkham games in one night. But now for some reason he can't even take on 4 B tier villains with no powers? They've made Batman into an absolute joke in this game, and that's further proven by what happens soon after. Because after this fight, we carry him back to LexCorp, where he then says this cringe line just to hammer home how much of a clown Batman is in this game.
You've already lost, Luthor. I am vengeance. I am...
The supposedly same Batman whose journey we've experienced for 4 games over many years is now reduced to the butt of the joke. After Lex is finished doing research on Batman in order to create the gold kryptonite, it leaves Batman permanently paralyzed, to which we then take him to the park in front of Superman's statue, where we then proceed to execute him in the most pathetic way possible. Here ensues the most infamous scene from this game. We sit Batman's limp body on a random park bench where he then uncharacteristically just makes rude comment after rude comment. Then Harley goes on a monologue about how he's been causing long-term mental and emotional damage to the bad guys he beat up, which I mean, just don't commit crimes for some of the most dangerous supervillains in Gotham. I don't know, maybe the job market's tough to break into over there. But I digress. After Harley's monologue, we get the one scene that sparked so much outrage online.
After all we've been through, oh, bet you didn't think it'd be me at the end, huh, Bats?
Are we done with your bad stand-up routine?
Almost. But you always gotta end on your best joke.
Batman's final words to Harley is a snide question like he's an angsty teenager who just got a lecture from his mom. And to make it worse, this would be the very last line that we would hear from the late Kevin Conroy in a video game ever again. I'm aware that Rocksteady didn't know that Kevin would pass away during production, but to write Batman as this punching bag of a character and then have him executed on some random park bench like he's a dying dog on the streets is just in poor taste. I hope the writers at Rocksteady have gotten what they wanted out of this, because they just completely shit on the legacy that they've built up for over a decade now. And it's sad to see a studio famously known for respecting the Batman IP and comic book lore reducing them into a complete joke. But anyways, following up on that horrible scene, we fight Superman immediately afterwards, and this fight also made no sense because it's Superman. He can instantly kill all 4 of the Suicide Squad even with their kryptonite, so us being able to survive this unscathed and even win against him makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And at this point you can really feel the quality of the writing go downhill because you can tell that Rocksteady is just rushing to finish the story now. But to add salt to the wound of Batman's death, Superman's was probably done even worse because everybody just forgot about him 30 seconds later, as if we didn't just kill the Superman, you know, the most dangerous being on Earth. Man, Rocksteady have really let themselves go. So after we kill Superman in the most flaccid and disappointing way possible, Brainiac finally reveals himself, and it's shown that he can freeze us in place whenever he wants to, but he never does it in his final boss fight for some reason. For the final stretch of the game, we take on Brainiac himself by going to his dimension and bringing the fight to him. And I've already gone into detail about how bad this fight was earlier, but to reiterate, this was the most disappointing and lazy final boss I've ever played in a modern AAA video game. Brainiac transforms into the Flash and only the Flash, even keeping his entire moveset of 2 abilities for the whole fight. We know he has the powers of the rest of the Justice League at his disposal, but he never uses them. And not only that, but how is the Suicide Squad able to take down Brainiac, whereas the Justice League struggle to even escape from him? He is supposed to be a 12th level intellect, whatever that means, and he just dies by some powerless nobodies with guns? This is what the Earth's mightiest heroes lost to? Somebody make it make sense, please. And after we defeat Brainiac, we take him back to HQ where Wallace shoves a data spike into his head, causing the destruction of the main ship, and the day is sort of saved. This is where it's then revealed that there are 12 more Brainiacs that we have to kill in alternate universes, thus ending the story off on a cliffhanger. This was the most unrewarding and dissatisfying ending I've ever experienced. We just killed the final boss of the game, yet it still feels like nothing has changed because the aliens are still invading Metropolis. And I know, this is a live service game, so it's going to be continually updated. But if this is the level of quality writing that we get in the base game, then I don't think I'll be interested in playing through the extra story content that they'll add in the future patches, because this is just one big mess. And that's it for everything wrong with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Overall, the whole experience can be described in one phrase: massively failed potential. I really wanted to like this game, but I just couldn't with all of its problems that it had and all of the potential left unexplored. This game had a lot of good ideas within it, but it only went so far as the surface level implementations of them. The gameplay loop that they had was actually pretty fun, but Rocksteady dropped the ball so hard in going further with what they had. I feel like this game actually could have been a good one, a great one even, if it didn't have to conform to the live service looter shooter trends that people are getting tired of now. And the story writing went from actually pretty good in the first half to dreadfully awful during the second half. The Suicide Squad had so much plot armor in the story, it's insane, and the Justice League was made out to look like a bunch of fools. And not only that, but their deaths were just plain insulting and disrespectful to the fans of those heroes, except for Wonder Woman because the writers had an obvious bias for her. But I don't think this is the last time we'll see the Justice League in this game, because I do think they'll eventually come back in the story, either as a multiverse variant or because the ones we killed were just clones. Whatever direction they take this part of the story would still feel like a cop-out either way, because the emotional journey that we went through in the story would feel like it was all for nothing. Either way, it's too little too late. People have already made up their minds about the story, and the game has suffered immensely for that. And if you made it this far into the video, thank you. This video took quite a while to make, and I thank each and every one of you who made it to the end. But what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down below, and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content in the future. See ya.